Good evening all, and welcome. I hope you're ready for the sweet embrace of the night, because it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I wasn't raised in church. My parents grew up with very religious parents and didn't want to force anything on us. That being said, in high school I got very curious about God and religion, and I started dating a guy when I was in 9th grade, who took me to the church with him. He was a Southern Baptist, so I kept going. We broke up, but that's important because that was my first experience with church. I just wanted to do the right thing. That isn't what this story's about. It's just a little background. Fast forward to my senior year. I start dating a guy in my grade. He was always popular and pretty mysterious. Everyone knew that he was religious, but didn't know what kind. They knew because his mum would attend our choir concerts always wearing long skirts and no jewellery nor makeup, and always had her hair in a bun. His best friend didn't even know what church he went to, but he told me that they didn't have a TV and weren't allowed to watch movies. I was very nervous to ask him which church he went to, even though we were dating, and I figured that after 3 months, I should know. I had asked him a few times to go with me to the Baptist church, but he always declined. Finally, I got up the courage, and I asked him which church he went to, and he only replied with, "You should see for yourself." I was quite excited. I got to be a part of it and be part of his life even more, with his invitation to his church. I went out and bought a long skirt and threw my hair up, and figured that I should be respectful and dress like his mother. He picked me up that following Wednesday evening and drove me to the meeting. It was at a Holiday Inn conference room. Everyone was very old except me, my boyfriend, his younger brothers, and 2 toddlers. The meeting, as they called it, was run by 2 very elderly women from Ireland. I could barely understand them, but the Bibles they used were ordinary Bibles, so I didn't feel too uncomfortable. They had a hymnal that just said hymns on the front. Everyone sang a cappella. There were never instruments. It was a very strange evening, but because they used a typical Bible, I figured it was fine. I eventually stopped attending the Baptist church that I was a part of, and strictly went to my boyfriend's meetings. Wednesdays were held at Holiday Inns, and Sundays were held in various friends' houses. Each member was called a friend. The meetings weren't huge, maybe 10 or 20 people. Each fall and spring though, they held conventions. They would be on someone's farm and would be every friend in the state, and sometimes a few surrounding states. Those weren't very big. We would stay in quarters and listen to people speak from the Bible. You also had a chance to stand up and read a verse that meant something to you. All of this happened very slowly, and over the course of 2 years or so, I must have been obsessed with trying to do the right thing and follow Jesus, because I didn't notice that I was being brainwashed. He took my virginity, and I ended up living with them. I have no idea to this day how the transition even happened, or if my parents wondered where I was. My parents were in the middle of a messy divorce, and honestly probably didn't even notice that I was gone. My boyfriend's mum didn't believe in using hospitals or doctors, and took a holistic approach to her family's health, and my health. She had me on different vitamins every day of the week. I was already very skinny, but over time I lost even more weight. I probably got down to around 80 or 90 pounds, and she also made me take iodine drops underneath my tongue every day. This all led to me being severely underweight, and I had stopped sleeping almost completely. I think the doctor said it was all the vitamin B12 in my system. Whilst in a hazy state of mind, I ended up getting baptized in a lake at one of the conventions. Shortly thereafter, when we went home, I started having panic attacks. Everything from this time is such a blur to me. Such a blur. I eventually had one big panic attack that threw me over the edge. I had a complete mental breakdown. I remember a few things very vividly. I tried to read the Bible to calm down, and I couldn't read anymore. Everything was just shapes and blobs. This led to more crying. My dad remarried 2 weeks after the divorce and married a woman called Nikki. I was convinced they were both Satan because of this. So I tried jumping off a very large hill near the house that I was staying at. I would have at the very least broken many bones if not died. I thought I was already dead, and was convinced that their house was a coffin, and they were burying me outside, and my soul was overhearing it all. I guess they realized that there was something wrong, and probably didn't want to be liable, because they found my dad's number and told him to come get me. I fought going, cried and screamed, but my dad took me back to his house. I couldn't sleep that night again, and I thought his house was the Twin Towers and that I was stuck inside as they were falling down. I started seeing rainbows everywhere, and my brain was truly messed up. The next day, my dad and stepmom took me to the behavioral health hospital. I remember it was the day that Steve Irwin died, because my dad told me in the waiting room, and I thought for sure that he'd murdered Steve Irwin and that's how he knew he was dead. But it was on the news in the waiting room. Either way, I stayed in an acute wing of the hospital for 2 weeks. They took my vitals several times a day. I had to go to group therapy sessions and drink Ensure all day until I was finally up to a healthy weight. That man and his family messed me up. I hope to never see them again. It's almost 10 years later, and I have nightmares about them still. I had one actually last night. They're mostly just present in the dream. I've had the courage to finally try and Google the name of the cult. It took some digging, but they're called the 2x2s. I sincerely hope that my message can at least help someone. Please, cults are never good for you. In freshman year of middle school, there was a once-a-week group therapy session with developmentally delayed kids that involved them doing some craft activity, or playing with Legos, or watching a movie as a group. It was half normal kids, half DD kids, and the normal kids could sign up for it. I signed up pretty much instantly, as it meant an escape from history once a week. One of my best friends at the time had the same idea, and it basically turned into a second lunch period for us. The whole thing was overseen by a therapist named Bruce, and it was generally pretty laid back. Bruce was an overweight 50-ish balding guy with an attitude and general appearance of Santa Claus. He ran most of the school's extracurricular activities and was pretty much universally liked. The other important player in this school was a kid I'll call G. You know the stereotype of psychopaths being obsessed with animal torture as kids? Well, this was dead on G. He would regularly tell these long, excited stories during group time about how much fun he had last week tearing the leg off a squirrel that he caught in his live trap, or other similar things. Most of us had sort of ignored him, and it was just assumed that he would talk and make up gross stuff to get attention. So one week, we were playing with Play-Doh. Since it was a DD group, the huge tub of Play-Doh had long since assumed a uniform shade of turd brown, and the general drive was to get people to build things and tell stories about them. Most people just built dinosaurs or threw clay at each other. G, for whatever reason, had a huge flat square slab laid out and was building 4 large pillars on the corner. He eventually put a roof on it, which wouldn't stay on due to the lack of interior supports. The normal kids would always leave a few minutes earlier as the group time ran into the start of next period and we would need to get to class. I was no different and walked out whilst Bruce and the other kids were smashing Play-Doh, giggling and throwing chunks of turd dough back into the bin. I got to my next class and the teacher wasn't there. Nobody knew what was going on, and about 10 minutes later she showed up looking frazzled and would not give us any other information other than something happened. Being 6th graders, we went nuts with speculation. A few hours later, I ran into a friend from the group who was visibly jumpy and disturbed. He wouldn't tell me why, other than mentioning that group therapy would be cancelled indefinitely. I kept prying for information and eventually got the story out of him. So during the cleanup, the Play-Doh had been compacted back into the tub, and this involved lots of smashing Play-Doh sculptures. A bit that the DD kids greatly enjoyed at this point when they tried to smash other people's stuff. G's house was one of the last things to go. He smashed down 2 columns and let one of the other DD kids smash one of the others, and finally dared Bruce to smash the last one really hard. The last one had a pocket knife in it. We never saw either Bruce or G ever again. I used to work at a pub that was 2 miles from my house. My shift ended at around 11 one night, and I stayed there for a few drinks, then started walking home. Now this had been an exceptional night for me tip-wise, and I had close to about $400 in cash on me at the time. Between the pub and my house was exactly 1 street light, about 1/4 of a mile from the pub, and the rest of the walk was in complete darkness. This was a dark night too. It was close to the new moon, and cloudy to boot, so it was almost pitch black. Now, I live out in the boonies, so there isn't much light pollution to help out. Not long after I leave the pub, a car slowly drives by me, and about 1/4 of a mile down the road, it slows to a stop, and it just sits there. I stop walking, tentatively watching the car. It sits for a few minutes, and then slowly drives away. A couple of minutes later, the same car comes slowly driving back by me in the opposite lane. It gets by me, drives down a bit on the road, and then stops again. Then it does a U-turn and starts creeping back down the road towards me with the lights off. At this point I'm absolutely terrified. I didn't have a cell phone at the time, and there was no one around to see what was going on. The car is between me and the pub, so I can't get back there to safety. My house is still about 1.5 miles away, and no way I can make a quick escape to there. So, I quickly run off the road into the woods and duck down behind a bush. I watch the car, but it's too dark to see it with the lights off and the bushes and the trees and the undergrowth between me and the road. I sit there for about 10 minutes, but I don't hear anything. I'm about to make my way back down the road when I hear car doors closing. Now I'm really panicked. It feels like my chest is about to explode, and the hairs on the back of my neck are standing up. I keep imagining someone sneaking up behind me. I stay hidden and hope to God whoever it is doesn't find me. I don't know how long I stay there, but I eventually hear car doors again, then the car passing by. I give it a couple of minutes in case it does a U-turn again, and then ease back into the road. When I see it's clear, I haul ass back towards the pub and let my boss know what happened. He said then and there I am never to walk home again on the night shift. Either him, his brother or his mum will give us a lift home. When the other servers and kitchen staff hear about what happened, they will say the same thing. I've never been that terrified before. I am not a cop, but my co-worker's father is, and he hit me with a whopper of a story once. For some background, I live in Austin, and all these occurrences were with the Austin Police Department and happened in 1978. An APD officer had pulled over a blue Mustang for not having a rear license plate. A man and a woman are inside. The officer tries to run the couple through dispatch, but the system is down, so he lets them go with a citation. After letting them go, however, dispatch lets him know that the man has an outstanding warrant. The officer pulls the couple over again and approaches the man. David Lee Powell knew that his arrest was imminent. Crawling into the back seat, he loaded his AK-47 and opened fire as the police officer approached. Mortally wounded, the officer called for backup before dying on the side of the road. Officer Villegas, my co-worker's father, hears on the radio that an officer is down only 8 blocks away and takes off straight for where he thinks the killer is heading, the highway. Before he arrives, however, he finds a blue Mustang in an apartment complex lot with its lights off, cruising at a really low speed. He peels into the parking lot, blocking the only exit, and calls for backup. Then a storm of bullets pound his police car, some from Powell's AK-47 and some from his lady accomplice's pistol. They exchanging fire, and Powell hurls a small oval-sized object towards the front of Officer Villegas' police cruiser. To the officer's horror, it was a hand grenade, and he was sure death was imminent. He explained that his last thoughts were being that of his wife and kids, and how he was sad that he would never be able to see them again, and that being the scariest moment in his 38 years on the force. But the grenade didn't go off, and Powell and his lady friend were out of ammo. As backup arrived, Powell took off behind the apartment complex into the woods, whereas the lady accomplice attempted to hide in a ditch. Seeing her in a ditch attempting to reload, Officer Villegas ran up to her and kicked her square in the face, shattering her jaw. Powell was later caught in the woods after a manhunt and received the death penalty for his actions that day. I had a very long dream. I was a vendor in a fish market. I remember getting up early, dressing, doing a whole morning routine, going to get tea, heading out to the docks, buying fish, loading them into a cart, and going to get ice, then haggling for ice, buying some less fresh fish whilst I was at it, then going to a market stall, setting up, and selling fish all day. It was so real. I spoke to friends, smoked nasty cigarettes, haggled customers, ate lunch, had tea, and just lived through the day. At the end of the day, I cleaned up, counted my cash, paid the store rent, went home, cooked some of the fish that I hadn't sold, slinged it with some veggies and rice that I traded for. I drank more tea, relaxed for a while, and then drew a hot bath, soaked and smoked some more cigs, and then went to bed. The next morning I woke up refreshed, ready to go down to the docks to buy fresh catch. Except I was in my house, next to my wife, truck parked outside, and it was Saturday. My wife and I were getting geared up to go skiing in Oregon, and the car was already packed. Weird thing was, in the dream, I was single, and a smoker, which I'm not, and the whole long dream had been in fluent Chinese. The effortless kind of fluency that only comes from a lifetime of speaking it. Oh, and I had been Chinese. I'm a big, hairy white dude, somewhat fluent in Spanish, and I know a little bit of Russian, but I've never. It's just weird. I've never worked in a fish market. I wonder who I was. And I wonder if some Chinese fish vendor woke up after having some dream about him being a big hairy white dude with a wife in a truck. Around March 2014, I started talking to this girl on Tinder. She seemed cool and fun, and after about a week of talking, she suggested that we meet in person. She invited me to this coffee shop, and I accepted. However, that day, she started messaging me saying that she had to tell me something. Her pictures on Tinder weren't actually of her, and yes, she was a guy. He claimed he really liked talking to me, and he begged me to still meet up with him. Naturally, I declined. I blocked his profile and continued on with life. About a week later, I started speaking with another girl. Once again, she seemed really cool and fun, and we hit it off. She asked me if I spoke to people on Tinder frequently, and rather stupidly I told her about my previous encounter with the man lady. Weeks later, I would realize that this new girl was the same girl as before. She asked me if I wanted to meet up, and I said sure, as long as it were in a public place. We decided on a cafe, and the next day I sat at the table waiting. 5, 10, 15 minutes had passed and she was nowhere to be seen. I then peered out the window and saw from across the street a man staring at me intently. I looked away, waited a few seconds and looked back. He was still standing there staring. At that point I left the cafe, got on my bike and booked it home. I was definitely a little freaked out, but tried to pull myself together and reason that no one could have followed me. I then deleted my profile and things went back to normal. About 3 weeks later, I started getting phone calls. The numbers all showed up as unknown. I picked up the first few times to some guy breathing heavily into the phone. I was already a little freaked out, and after about a day, I stopped picking up any calls unless it displayed the caller's name. Then I started receiving texts. At first they were pretty harmless, calls for attention and begging me to meet in person. It then changed to very sexual texts, until eventually the messages became threatening, and whoever was messaging me started throwing out my family and friends' names and whereabouts, saying that he would get them involved unless I answered. Because they were texting me, I could see a displayed number, but when I called the phone providers they told me that the number couldn't be traced, and that it was probably a track phone. Great. I waited about 2 more weeks not responding to the texts, thinking that I shouldn't feed the troll. But eventually it became too much. I started getting upwards of 50 texts and phone calls a day. I would wake up to 10 to 20 texts every morning. I then decided to change my number altogether. The harassment stopped for a while, but sure enough it started happening again. I called my phone provider asking if they ever gave out my number at a user's request, and they said that their policy stated that they wouldn't give out a number unless valid identification had been provided. Then one day, I tried logging into my Facebook, but was denied. Within a day, friends started contacting me, asking me what the hell I was doing, saying that they were getting terrible messages from my account. In particular, one of my girlfriends was receiving messages about her mum who died years ago. I apologized profusely and told people what was going on. I contacted Facebook and explained the situation, and they helped me access my account again. At which point I just deactivated it for a while. Enough was enough. I decided to contact the FBI, explaining what had been going on for over a month now. They documented everything, but told me since I or any of my relatives were not in any immediate danger, they probably wouldn't be able to do anything. At that point I felt stuck. I thought about hiring a private investigator or a hacker, but I decided against it and just hoped that it would fade out if I never answered. I left my Facebook deactivated and ignored any texts or phone calls. I never had any trouble at home, but some of my closest friends received the occasional text, which always weirded us out. I hated that they got dragged into this, and one day, I came home and everything felt very eerie. Door unlocked, windows opened and no one home. A strong breeze was running through the apartment. I did a check of the place and found nothing else weird, so I locked everything up and just waited for my roommates to get home. It's been almost 7 months now. The calls and texts have more or less stopped. I get an occasional text, but at the very most 1 or 2 a week. At the peak of it, I was receiving almost 100 texts a day. It definitely affected my social/personal life. I became much more wary of the people around me and of my surroundings. I just felt like I couldn't really focus on anything until this stopped. Work was difficult, though I tried to maintain my composure as best I could. Everything was just weird. Life was weird. I've since stopped using all forms of dating apps or websites. Things are now getting back to normal. I just want to put it all behind me. I'm moving at the end of the year, so it'll be nice to have a fresh start in a new place. I'm not going to sit here and say that dating apps are dangerous and that no one should use them, but definitely cover your bases. Ask more questions before meeting someone. FaceTime them first. Skype, anything. I was naive about it, and I regret it. Be safe, stick close to your friends, and try meeting people in more traditional ways. Weird Tinder stalker? Let's not meet again. When my mother met and married my stepfather, I was 4 or 5 years old. He began to introduce me to the cult he belonged to almost immediately. I don't think my mother realized that he was in one, although he was trying to get her into it slowly. During evenings when my mother went out, or weekends, whenever he could get me alone, or school holidays, or times when he'd come and get me to take me out of school, he would work on teaching me how to be a member of the cult that he believed in. Whenever my mother wasn't around, there were training sessions and practice sessions for his cult. Eventually, there were times where he'd get me in the middle of the week from school and take me to a group camp sort of place that other members of his group set up for extended activities. Sometimes they would trade children for the getaway period, like swap us back and forth for cross-training. Once in a very great while, a kid there would die, but usually those were the kids that were just picked up and not legally part of their families, so they didn't have to make excuses for them missing. I was very lucky, because my stepdad didn't like to share me, so I was never cross-trained. My mother helped my stepfather in a lot of ways, not because she knew what he was doing and what was involved, but because she was naturally a hateful sort of person, who helped him in isolating and keeping me from making any long-term friends. She refused to let me watch television, listen to radio or music, or go to parties or any special events. It was a lot like being a Jehovah's Witness family, I believe, only she wasn't one. She just didn't want me around, and did not want me to inconvenience her in any way, so the house was closed to me. I was restricted to my room for most of my life as a child by her. and that helped him, because it gave him a lot more access and control over me. My stepdad's cult was a sexual slavery group. They believed that women were naturally inferior and meant to be slaves. My training was to teach me how to be a slave, how to endure pain, how to pose for long periods of time, and essentially how to be furniture, and what he called preparations for my womanhood. By the time I was around 8 or 9, he was trying to get my mother into softer versions of what he was doing with me, with his buddies in his group. He was trying to get her to do swinging and wife-swapping and stuff, but my mum was naturally a prude, who actually hated sex in the first place, which kind of made things worse on me, and made him more impatient. I then told a childhood friend some of the stuff he did, but not about the camps and about the poses and the training and the kids that were all expendable. She told her mother, who told my mother that I was being molested. There was a lot of screaming and shouting in the house, and the embarrassing interviews with her interrogating me, and being really angry at me. I was so scared, because of the threats that he'd made me, but also because she was furious that I minimalized what he was doing, and kept it to just preparing me for womanhood. She separated him for 3 months, but it was too hard for her to make it on her own income, and she was too proud to ask for help, and refused to go to any kind of assistance, because she didn't want to be a welfare mum, like all the wetbacks she hated. So she took me back to him, and basically just gave me to him. I tried to tell her that he was going to start stuff up again. I was told that she was too tired to hear it right now, so I never got any help from her again. By the time I was around 11, I began to read books about child abuse, molestation, and cults. I couldn't find anything about sexual slavery, but there was enough already in there for me to understand that what he was doing was wrong, and that I had to fight it. I began to refuse him. Every day was a battle of screaming, shouting, throwing things, hitting each other, whilst my mother would then punish me for being disrespectful to my stepfather. In the end, he was trying to rape me in the afternoons, and I was stalking the house at night whilst he slept, with a knife in my hands, trying to get the nerve to kill them both in their sleep. Just as I was ready and prepared to do it, I had packed stuff and everything. He just disappeared. After a week of him being gone, my mother told me that he had been having an affair with another lady who was only 17 years old, but already had a 2-year-old daughter, and then she kicked him out for cheating on her, and that's how I got out of the cult. However, later on as an adult, I stupidly ended up with another guy who was into the same thing. He started out trying to pass it off as just an interest in normal bondage fetishes, but in the end, I found out that he was with the same group of people who were now apparently internationally spread out with private compounds and vacation places all over the map. It tore me up when I realized it. I called the police and changed the locks, and I found the boxes and photos of his private photo collection at the camps that he went to, with other men posing with women, tied up, cut up, unconscious, and beaten. So that was the second time I escaped from a kind of cult, and it's been 13 years now since I earned my freedom. Over a decade ago, I went to the Amazon jungle, to a family of shamans who had lived on their ancestral ground going back 1,000 years, if not more. All firstborn males in the family followed the path of the ayahuaceros and healers for their community. So I arrive, and since I'm not from the jungle, I am told that we must do a ceremony so the spirits of the jungle would welcome me safely. The ceremony consisted of lots of singing around a fire that was encircled by beautiful flowers and leaves that we had collected and arranged earlier. a cutting of the capi plant, was present for this and held a special center location in the biomandala we had created. The people I stayed with viewed the capi plant as representative of Mother Earth, and thus viewed it with reverence. After what felt like hours, the man told me the ceremony was complete and led me to my room located in a separate detached structure on the second floor. There were some windows in the room, and after a short while decided to go to sleep. I was awoken in the middle of the night by a cacophony of sounds. I was hearing various distinct animal sounds. Birds, roars, guttural bellows, screams, sounds that I had never heard before in my life. The thing about it is that the sounds were all so different. They were definitely not all the same species. They all had such vastly different sounds coming from many different locations. I was freaked out, but stayed silent and tried not to move. If I had to estimate, it really felt like over 15 different types of sounds being produced. Then the banging started. It felt like dozens of animals were smashing their bodies into the structure, all around me. There was substantial weight being thrown into the outside walls, whilst the animal cries were going off. I was terrified because the windows were open, but maintained still. I couldn't even move due to the fear of what was just slamming into the walls. So I prayed and prayed for protection, and somehow fell asleep. And I awoke later in the night to a large cockroach crawling on me. The next morning I wake up safe, and no evidence outside of anything having occurred hours ago. I ran into the healer that day, and he asked me how I slept. Not so well, I replied, and explained last night's occurrence. He laughed and said it was just the jungle welcoming me. I stayed there for around 20 days, and it only happened to me on that first day and never again. I almost have a semi-existential crisis every time I dwell upon this. I'm a bartender, and I usually head home around 2 to 4 AM. On a slow Monday night, we were about to close the restaurant when a seemingly homeless woman walked into the bar. Working in a city, we're used to vagrants making their way into the bar, so kicking her out would be easy. My manager yelled at her, "Hey, sorry, we're closing up. We won't be able to serve you, you'll have to leave." She kept walking slowly and silently towards the bar, staring straight ahead with a blank face. As she walked closer, we realized she looked unusual for a homeless woman. Her skin was grey. I've never seen a skin colour like hers in my life. It wasn't dirty nor tanned. It was a very light grey that was tight, with almost no wrinkles. She had a tattoo of 4 lines on her face, and they all started at one point in the centre of her chin, then continued down to her neck in a ray-like pattern, and she also had no shoes on. Once she reached the bar counter, she went to pull out a chair when my manager yelled, "Hey, we're closing up. Also, you can't be in here without any shoes. You're going to need to leave now." She continued to sit down, and then turned her head slowly to look at me, and locked eyes with me. "I like you," she said. At this point my finger was on the bar panic button. By this point our bouncer finally made his way over, and put his hands on her shoulders and asked her to leave. The second he touched her, she broke out into this extremely loud, high-pitched manic scream. It was like a scream from a horror movie. What made it creepier, the whole time she was screaming, she was looking at me dead in the eye without blinking. She wasn't moving, so my bouncer had to forcibly remove her from the bar. I pushed the panic button and watched my bouncer pull away with this woman as she was screaming uncontrollably, all the while staring straight at me. The police came fairly quickly and took the woman away. I have no idea what her deal was or what became of her, but to this day, it was still the creepiest night I've ever had at work. My dad is a cop. Obviously, he always tried to downplay the danger of situations to my sister and me, so he wouldn't scare us. But one morning he came home shaken. I was a teenager at the time, and I asked him to tell me what had happened. He and his partner were doing the graveyard shift, and there was a seemingly abandoned car on the side of the road. They got out to see if anyone was in it. My dad was first, whilst his partner stayed in the car to radio report. I'm not too sure how this next part happened, but as he was approaching the car, he realized that there were multiple people hiding in there. All of them were acting super strung out. As he's going to back away to wait for his partner, he hears his partner running over. He identifies himself as police to the people in the car and asks if there are any weapons in the car and things like that. His partner comes around and starts getting people out of the car, and they see a gun. Okay, kind of a biggie. His partner goes to start talking to the people in the car to see whose it was. In that time, one of their people had gotten away from the group. My dad was speaking with the driver nearest the front of the car, and his partner was talking to a few others towards the back. As my dad was questioning this guy, the guy's eyes go wide, and he kind of backed up. He turned around to see why, and a man had a handgun pointing to the back of his head. He's a cop, so obviously he's had guns pointed at him before, but never that close. Thankfully he is a beast, and he started talking to calm him down, and just telling him to take his finger off the trigger. Whilst he was doing that, he put his hand up slowly towards his face in the I surrender position, and the second guy took his finger off the trigger, and he stuck his finger behind it. Then he called over his partner and they handcuffed him. Obviously it's terrifying that if the driver hadn't widened his eyes, he would have never known and could have possibly been dead. But I'm thankful every day that he acted quickly. I rather like having him around. I've always had those déjà vu dreams, where the events in your dream happen in real life, where it happens days or years later. Mine plays off this ordeal, except knowing what happened next saved my life. My dream was simple. I was driving down the mountains back home with friends in the car. What I vaguely remember is that we were on a snowboard/skiing trip. The conversation was the usual for the long car ride. I spy this and just stupid stuff. Then, Smash Mouth All-Star came on, and I remembered it because everyone started singing along. We were speeding down the mountains, and after signalling into the passing lane, all of a sudden, a huge car wreck happens right in front of us. It happened so fast that cars smashed into each other, and one of the cars involved rolled off the mountain over the divider. It was too close to avoid, so I pulled to the right, which caused the car behind us to plow into the side of us, rolling our car to the opposite side of the road. I remember just a fuzzy feeling, upside down, and just glancing around the car and seeing my friends mutilated. It sends shivers down my spine to even think about it. I wake up and I'm in tears. I was just so frightened and scared, it was surreal. This is where the glitch begins. After years passing from the night of the dream, my friends and I decided to get together to plan a small trip to have a ski and snowboard day for the first snowfall. We knew a storm was coming, so we headed up to the mountains. Good runs, fresh snow, and it was overall a great success. We had gotten exactly what we'd come for. We packed our things, headed down the mountain, and it clicked. The same stupid car banter. I Spy and then Smash Mouth. It all came on. It happened. I was in my nightmare. The wreck happened just as I remembered. But I didn't pull right as I did in the dream. I pulled left into the opposite lane, and somehow just avoided it. Everything slowed down. It was like as if I were in my own world, and everything happened the same except for my actions. We pulled to the side of the road and called 911. I broke down. It was too much. I was again scared and shaking, but somehow that stupid dream saved my life. When I was 15, I moved to Utah. It was a smaller town just north of Salt Lake City, and far enough west that the wind would carry the smell of the lake, and the air would reek of spoiled sea. I got dumped halfway into sophomore year, which was terrible for an awkward kid in a new place, because in Utah, they began high school with sophomore year, so I was effectively a freshman twice. The only luck I had was a girl I met named Sarah, and we started dating right at the end of the school year, so we were able to spend the majority of summer together. Now, you might not know this about the Mormons, and I certainly hadn't, but in their church they really like big families, something about spirits in heaven requiring bodies. So it wasn't uncommon for some of the more devout Mormon families to have 8, 9 or more kids. It really just meant outdoor freezers packed with hamburger helpers and houses with bigger kitchens. Sarah's family was pretty Mormon, and my family didn't practice much of any religion. So we just never discussed it. She had 6 sisters, 7 including herself, ranging from 6 years old to 18. I only met her mother once, and she was always pregnant. And I never spoke with her dad. I was a little too overwhelmed by meeting her family, and I avoided it. I probably would have figured it out by then, but I'd only lived in Utah for 6 months, and everything already seemed so weird to me. I remember a particular night I'd picked her up. She had a curfew that made it so that I had to park down the street so that she could sneak out. I wanted to jump over a small gully flanked by trees beside her house, but she refused, and we had to walk around, which meant passing her parents' window. I thought it was weird, but I just assumed she was worried that she might get her feet wet. It went like that for a couple of months. I would stop down the street, and I would wait while she walked besides the gully around her house, and up the street to meet me. Sometimes I'd meet her at the end of the road, but I was always careful not to walk too far onto the lawn, for fear I'd wake her parents. One night it was raining, and I didn't want her to walk alone through the dark in the rain, so I had planned on surprising her by meeting her by the back door through which she snuck out. To save time and avoid walking by the window, I walked over to the trees and saw the gully. The water was a bit higher and moving quicker than normal because of the rain runoff, but I figured that I could make the jump. Man, was I wrong. My feet landed in the mud on the other side, but I sank immediately in the wet earth and splashed hard into the muck. The rush of cold water was a shock, and I reached up and grabbed the storm drain. But what I had grabbed and dislodged flowed down with me. The water wasn't very deep, maybe 2 or 3 feet, so I stuck my shoes in it, still holding what turned out to be a black garbage bag. I dropped it and started to crawl up, and my hand landed on another black garbage bag. I tried to crawl up, but they kept dislodging this slick, viscous grime. It must have been the third or fourth time I tried to find something to grip onto, when I accidentally tore one open. At first I thought it was a rotten orange, black and decaying amongst a spoiled nest of old bones. But I could just make it out. Yellowed skin bloated on white bone. It was a skull. A baby. I let out a shout. I didn't know what else to do. It smelled awful, and I was suddenly afraid to be near it. Quickly I scrambled up through the mud and kicked myself up against a tree, my heart racing. Sarah was there. She was crying. She had been waiting for me by the street and came over when she heard me shout. She must have always known. I never saw her again, and all of the girls were pulled out of school. The local news report said that her father had decided he had enough kids and had been burying each newborn out by the gully. But they recovered 5 tiny bodies, all girls. I wonder if he had just been waiting for a son. A couple of years ago, I had been having a lot of bad luck in the love department and decided to try one of those online dating apps. I'd been talking to a guy for a couple of weeks, and we had hung out a couple of times. One day, we were just driving around when he said he wanted to go to smoke some pot at a local park and walk the trails in the woods. I had smoked before, but not often, and had several hours before I had to be at work. So I said sure, why not? We went to a nearby house. He went in and bought some of the pot, and then we drove away. After I had taken a couple of puffs, I said I was good and didn't want any more. That was when things started to go bad. He got really pushy and said that I was being a pussy when I refused. He grabbed the back of my neck and shotgunned a massive cloud of smoke into my lungs. Almost immediately I started to not feel right. As I've said before, I have smoked weed in the past and knew what being high felt like, and this wasn't it. I tried to text message my ex, who was still my best friend at the time. I messaged him, "At the park, something wrong." What was I meant to say? But it was just all jumbled. The whole time this guy is sitting there, asking me pointless and meaningless questions like, "Isn't that tree pretty? What's your favourite ice cream place?" My ex called my phone and started asking me things. "Are you okay? Should I call the police?" I told him I was fine and no, hoping he would hear the panic in my voice, as I was afraid of letting this guy know that I had tried to get help. At that point, the creep got out of the car, walked over to my side and opened the door. He said we should go for a walk and that I would feel better. I got as far as the playground and sat down. There was really no way I was willingly going to go into the woods with this guy. He kept acting like I was just really high and needed to walk it off, but I had never felt like this before. I was freezing and burning at the same time, dizzy beyond belief, and was having problems staying conscious. Just when I thought that there would be no help, a park ranger thankfully drove through the park, and I tried to wave him down, but the guy made it look like we were just waving to be friendly. Then my phone vibrated with a text. It was my ex telling me that his sister was on his way to get me and to hang on. I had never been so happy in my life. When she got there, she told him I was leaving with her, and she took me home where my ex was waiting. He took care of me the rest of the night, and constantly felt like I was spinning. The next day we went back to the park to retrieve my car, and my ex told me that he had spoken to a few people that he knew, and the house that we had went to buy the pot from has been selling it laced with GHB. I got lucky that day. I was lucky enough to realize that something wasn't right, lucky to have the determination to stay conscious, and smart enough to make sure that he didn't get his hands on my phone or keys. I don't want to know what would have happened to me if he would have gotten me in those woods, and I will never use a dating app again. When I was 17, I moved out of my parents' house and began working as a carny. This required me to use my pickup to tow things around the country. One night, I was heading back to South Carolina and had stopped in Kentucky at a truck stop to use the restroom and to get a snack. It was around about 1 a.m. I parked on the side of the building, went inside, and I always got super sketched out stopping at night, just because I was a 17-year-old girl. As I was walking out, I heard, "Hey baby, damn, where you going?" He kept saying things like that until I was out of view. It was a tall, skinny dude walking out of the store behind me. I hustled to my truck and locked myself in. Now that should have been enough to get me out of there immediately, but being tired, I decided to sift through my phone before heading out again. 10 minutes passed after the catcalls, and I see the same man emerge from a dumpster near where the semis park. A car pulled up next to the dumpster just as he walked out, and what I saw next made my head spin. I couldn't believe what I had just witnessed. The back door of the car opened, and a little girl, maybe around 12 years old, got out. They were obviously not related, and she was panicking. He grabbed her by the hand, walked back behind the dumpster and towards the semis. Then the car took off. I was shaking so badly, but I managed to find out where I was, and I called the sheriff. He met me after 10 minutes, and I told him exactly what I'd seen. However, he didn't seem too surprised. He said they'd look over the surveillance tapes, and I made sure to include how exactly he catcalled me, so that they could know exactly which guy I was talking about. I left, and have no idea whatever came of it. The guy was probably long gone with the girl before the sheriff met me, but maybe, just maybe, I saved her from a life of being a sex slave. So child molester trucker, let's never, ever meet again. I was working on a mine site that was shut down from production because the resource that we were mining dropped steeply in price. One night, there were 2 blokes in the plant, a guy running the powerhouse, which is about 1 kilometer away, and me, security/medic, and the only lady, of course, all alone in the gatehouse. The site itself was about 1.5 hours from civilization, and even though I was on the day shift, it gave me the heebie-jeebies. There was no toilet in my office/medical center, so I would have to walk across to the adjacent administration building, turn on all the lights, and walk all the way through to use the ladies. I had worked in this field for a while at this point, at many different sites, and I had never been worried nor frightened before, even when wandering around at night on my own. My desk has a window, which has a direct view down the access road to the site. As I'm sitting on my computer, I see movement out of the corner of my eye. There is a man walking down the access road towards the gatehouse at 3 a.m. My spidey sense is screaming at me, but I don't falter. I email the powerhouse and advise that I have someone at the gate, and that they can call and check on me in 5 minutes. So I open the service window to talk to my oncoming visitor. I'm looking at him, and as he gets about 20 meters from the gatehouse, he vanishes. I shit my pants. I lock all the things and call the plant, asking one of the guys to come over but not telling him why. He arrives and can clearly see I have shaken, I tell him what I've just seen. He goes, "Oh, that's just Dave." Dave? Who the hell is Dave? "Oh, he's that guy that died in the crib room. Didn't anyone ever tell you the story?" Well, no, they hadn't. And assuming he was just trying to freak me out, I conducted a little Google investigation. And sure enough, a man was shot nearby and brought by his friends to the site for help, and he died in the crib room. So now, I don't pee for my whole 12-hour shift obviously, and close all the blinds. A few months later, I come in on a day shift and I'm doing the rosters. The night shift medic tells me in no uncertain terms, "Don't ever put me on nights here again. I refuse to do them." And he wouldn't tell me why. So I say to him, "It's okay, I've seen him too. Just shut the blinds from now on, yeah?" Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. My cold has actually gotten worse, but I'm hoping it clears up in the next few days or so. Oh, and great news, the merchandise is nearly complete. I'm thinking it should be out by tomorrow, just in time for Halloween. How very appropriate, don't you think? If you enjoyed today's video, please consider dropping a like and leaving a comment. It's a really great way to help support the channel, and I really appreciate it. And if you would like to do something incredible to help support the channel further, feel free to visit my Patreon page. You can find the link in the description, as well as the links to my social media. And if you want your story read on my channel, you can submit it as a text post to my Reddit page or send it to me via email. Both links can be found in the description. But anyway, for now guys, I'm going to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.